The Bible's full of stuff you never read. You just can't keep it straight in your head. I'm gonna tell you now what's in that book. Okay, so look. Genesis chapter 4, verses 1 through 24. Raising Cain. Adam and Eve, having been kicked out of the Garden of Eden, decide to make the best of it and settle down to raise a family. Their firstborn son is Cain, who plants fields and raises crops. Their second son is Abel, who makes the rather odd decision to become a shepherd. This might not seem all that abnormal, until you recall that God has so far told people they can only eat plants. He doesn't allow them to eat meat until Genesis 9, which is over a millennium later. So apparently Abel is raising flocks of animals just to hang out with. It's possible, of course, that Abel's ignoring God and is raising the animals to eat. If that were the case, though, you might expect God to be somewhat annoyed. Instead, we're told that Cain and Abel both bring offerings to God from their respective work, and that God is pleased by Abel's offering, but not by Cain's. Evidently, God has no problem with animals being sacrificed, he just doesn't want them being eaten. Cain, not having made this non-intuitive mental leap, is pretty irritated by the whole situation. God, displaying something less than the grace and insight you'd expect of an all-powerful deity, tells him to quit whining and do better next time. Cain, smarting at the double rebuke, takes out his anger on his brother and kills him. When God asks Cain where his brother is, Cain responds with a great line, "Am I my brother's keeper?" God, who knows perfectly well what has happened to Abel, doesn't care for Cain's smart alecky tone and curses him. Because Cain spilled his brother's blood on the ground will no longer produce crops for him, and he's condemned to wander the world. Additionally, God marks him so that no one will kill him. He's forced to live out the rest of his life with the weight of what he's done, away from his parents and from God. Now, you might think that Cain was going to have a pretty lonely time of it, what with his parents being the first people and all. However, he heads off to the land of Nod, which means wandering in Hebrew, so technically he's still a wanderer, or at least a wanderinger. And he finds at least one person there, a woman, who he marries. My best guess is that this woman's either the female half of the couple that God made in Genesis 1, or descended from them. The Bible runs through 6 generations of Cain's begats. Figures that's about all you need to know about Cain's legacy, and lets the whole thing drop to get back to Adam. But here's an interesting point. God blessed the couple that he made in the first chapter, commanding them to be fruitful and multiply. Adam and Eve, however, got no such blessing. If these folks from Nod really are descended from the Genesis 1 people, they're the ones who are meant to take over everything. This leaves Adam and Eve out in the cold, but then that's pretty much how things have been going for them all along. Tell me who you are and what your interface with religion is.
I am Tiffany McCann, and I was raised in a small Protestant denomination, Church of the Brethren, if anybody's curious. And I have a minor in philosophy and religion from Bridgewater College.
Fair enough. So, all right, speaking as a Jew, I know basically nothing about the various divisions of Christianity. What sets your Protestant one off from everything else?
We are one of the original Anabaptist churches, one of the 3 peace churches. If you're familiar with Amish or Mennonites, the Church of the Brethren is the 3rd branch of that same limb. Historically pacifist, simple living, and very conservative about material worldview, eschewing of the material world.
But you're on the internet, so have you broken away, or are they just not as severe?
They are not as severe. Most brethren these days are on the internet and living in the world with a mindfulness about not being encapsulated by the world, maybe. And in reality, a lot of Mennonites and some Amish are too, to certain degrees. You will still find some brethren wearing old style dress, especially the old order brethren, may still sit separately. Men and women in church sit on different sides. They might drive a car, but it might be a black car.
So that's the compromise there, is it no flashy colors?
Right. It's sort of the Henry Ford style. And no showing off of material goods, no acting like you desire material goods.
But you're allowed to desire them, you just can't tell other people about it.
No, you're pretty much not supposed to desire them. Well, I didn't have a whole huge amount of pop culture exposure as a kid, and that's partly why. Oh, no gambling, no drinking, no dancing. Let's see. Oh, somebody brought lottery tickets to work one time, and I had no idea how they worked, because that would never, ever have been allowed in my.
You're talking about just the scratch off kind?
Yeah, I think so.
Fair enough. So, obviously you said you were raised like this. Is this your current view on religion, or have you grown and evolved since then?
I have grown and evolved. I would currently tell you that I think there is something about humans' brains that benefits from believing in something larger than themselves. Would not proclaim to be a Christian. I would not proclaim to believe in a God. I do think that there's probably a good reason that so many people do, and I don't begrudge them that. Sometimes it seems like it would be nice, but I am relatively agnostic on the issue.
So what, was it just a journey of exploration for you? Is it you slowly came to realize God didn't have a lot of impact in your life, or was this a traumatic event, something in between these options?
Yeah, no trauma, just a lot of science, and I tend to be a fairly evidence-based person in most of my life, and I like things I can see and touch and influence.
That's fair. I mean, that's definitely not, God's not going to fit the bill there. The whole point of faith is that you have to, I mean, take it on faith.
Yeah.
So, in specific, obviously, in this particular chapter, we're talking about Cain and Abel, which is an interesting section of the Bible. It's the first murder.
Yeah, it's a fun story about brotherhood and getting along with your siblings, right?
Yeah, and this is a really interesting one in terms of if you assume that the Bible is meant to be instructional. I mean, even if you assume it's literal, presumably these particular literal stories were picked for a reason. This is a very weird story. It contains the message of don't murder your brother, which I think is a fairly straightforward one, which we probably knew with or without an instructional video on it. But then the rest of it, that God's punishment for Cain is to make sure no one hurts him. That he gives him the mark of Cain and sends him off to go live out the rest of his life, which in those days, according to the Bible, was several hundred years.
So this is sort of the go to your room and think about what you've done punishment?
It is, although in this case it's go to another country and find some interesting mystery people.
It's almost akin to being shunned, which is the Amish or Brethren or Mennonite practice when somebody has violated a major tenet of the faith. They will shun you, and it will be so drastic as to include even eye contact or acknowledging that you have spoken. They literally won't even acknowledge that you are a human being in the room. And it's the most violent recourse that community has against an individual.
I've heard about shunning, but does it happen often, or is it just a threat that's known to be out there?
No, it happens. It absolutely happens. And I wouldn't say often because it is brutal not only to the person being shunned, but their family and their friends and their community. Because, of course, these are extraordinarily close-knit communities. You know how many billions of cousins I have, and these are just like that, that your family are your friends and your coworkers and the people you see day in, day out. So for those people to suddenly decide that you are not a human being, you're not even a presence, is just appalling. And the shunned typically leave. They're not forced out. They're not physically forced out, which is really interesting. But emotionally, mentally, they leave. There's just no ability usually for them to put up with that, to deal with those people just blatantly ignoring their existence for years. They'll leave the community, and it's known throughout the denomination, throughout the community. So they're not going to be able to move to another Amish or Mennonite community. They have to basically go out into the world, a la Cain.
So shunning is permanent. There's no shunned for a year. You're
right. Yes, shunning is permanent. If whatever they did to get shunned can be undone. Used to be you could get shunned for marrying an outsider, and if you left said outsider died, you became widowed or whatever, you could sometimes rejoin the community, but that generally isn't a reason to get shunned anymore. So it's going to be more of a major crime that's going to get you shunned, and yeah, you're done. You're gone.
So what would happen if someone who got shunned chose not to leave? Would they be essentially a poltergeist?
Yeah, it would be like having a ghost in your house. It would be, you would interact with them less than you would interact with an animal. You wouldn't set a place for them at the table. You wouldn't leave a space in the driveway for their horse or their buggy or your car or you do not acknowledge their existence.
Well, it's actually a really interesting read on this chapter because they never mention what Adam and Eve think about Cain here, and obviously he's killed his brother, which is one of their two kids, but they never talk about him going home or anything. So it's an interesting idea that he just went home and Adam and Eve decided to shun him.
Yeah, well, and I haven't read in a while, and I'm not sure, do they not have more children? Yeah,
they don't have any right now. They have Seth, and they have Enosh, I think. No, that's Enosh and Seth's son.
Yeah, I think so. But so at that point, they've lost both of their children.
Yeah, Adam and Eve both live for another 800 years after that, so they have time to have plenty of more kids. But at the time, it was their only two kids. God is just sort of a very weird guy here. There's the reason that Cain was mad at Abel was that God rejected Cain's sacrifice and preferred Abel's, and when Cain complained, God told him to suck it up, which is, you would hope your God would be a little more mature than that.
It would be nice. Yes, another concern for people who are deciding to follow this God, hook, line, and sinker.
Well, but that's it. I mean, if this is a literal reading here, or if it's meant to be, there's just sort of it's God's exact words here are, if you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. Which is, the guy brought him a sacrifice. God just didn't like it. And this is the first instance of anybody sacrificing anything to God. He tried something. It didn't work out. And God's like, well, you should have tried harder. That's a little rough. That is not a very nice teacher there.
Yeah, you have to wonder, would he have been better off if he hadn't tried? What did he do wrong? Was it the wrong vegetable? Did he not do it with a cheerful heart? Where did the fault lie?
Well, interestingly, the one that God liked from Abel was the meat, which, again, people weren't actually allowed to eat yet. So it's sort of curious that, oh yeah, I appreciate you raising these animals and then killing them for me, and then I guess throwing it away.
Right, or was God eating meat in these days? Was that
Might have been. I know the way sacrifices traditionally worked was they would offer burnt offerings, which conveniently leaves you with cooked meat, which the priest would then eat. So certainly, in that case, it was working out well.
The smell of the smoke rising to the heavens is pleasing something.
Right.
Yeah. I guess in fairness, cooked meat smells better than cooked vegetables, speaking as an omnivore. So, maybe God was just more impressed with Abel's culinary ingenuity.
Well, I think it certainly, it says something if the person has come up with an entirely new kind of food, whether it's allowable or not. And God, as I've noted several times here, is very forgetful. So he may have forgotten that he told everyone to be vegetarian.
Could they be wearing the animals? Maybe they were already killing them to wear.
It's possible. God did give them leather clothes in the end of the last chapter.
So maybe he was just using the discarded insides of the animal, in which case he's just sacrificing trash, which is, again, somewhat less impressive.
Yeah, but God liked it. So, it's one of those one man's trash, another man's treasure kind of thing.
Hey, maybe he's in favor of recycling.
I like that. It's that, God said, you can't eat these animals, but you can cut them open and wear their outsides. And then Abel went, well, hey, I'm just throwing these insides away anyway. What the heck? May as well burn them.
Yeah, sacrifice them and make some use of them. Yeah, it's not all about the meat. It's about the ecological consciousness.
I like that. So it's really, Abel was being rewarded for thinking outside the box. He was an innovator.
Right, and less wasteful.
Absolutely. Reduce, reuse, recycle.
Because somebody else could have eaten those vegetables, theoretically.
Right. There weren't a lot of people then, but maybe there weren't a lot of vegetables either.
4 people, you don't figure you're cultivating acres and acres and acres.
I don't really know. They didn't have PlayStation in those days, but then again, I don't know. It just feels like if you weren't doing anything else, it wasn't like there was a lot of stuff going on those days. Getting back to the brethren and all that, I guess that's how a lot of people live these days too.
Right. I was going to say, you can sustain probably a 4-person household on a little less than an acre if you're, using crop rotation and fertilizing and whatnot pretty handily. Maybe they have, I'm guessing they didn't have chickens for eggs, but maybe something equivalent, dodo eggs or something. And wait, eggs, can they eat eggs?
It's unclear. In Genesis 1, it only says they can eat plants. So I think that eating animals or anything that comes from animals is still off the table.
Okay, so they're probably vegan, other than the wearing of tricky. Regardless, you don't need an enormous amount of land to support that many people. Yeah, about an acre. And that includes a cow in these days. Nowadays, you could homestead on an acre with a cow and still plant enough crops to feed yourself. And it's not like they need to take the extra to market, per se.
Right. I was going to say there's no one else, but I guess there are other people. They're just in Nod, so still not a good marketplace.
No.
So I keep looking at this chapter. I try to figure out what the overall message of this chapter is. And the only message I'm getting here is don't mouth off to God. He's going to do what he feels like.
Oh, I always took it to be an explanation of why farming is hard.
I like that. I think that's good because that follows on the heels of the previous chapter where God cursed Adam to make farming hard.
Right. Yes. This is why, the sweat of your brow is required. This is why less instructional and more explanation of why things are the way they are.
Gotcha. So you think that this is really more of just an expansion on.
Yes.
Yeah, I like that. That's good.
Now, I know that there are religions that have considered the mark of Cain to be visible and permanent and heritable.
Right, because it's the mark of Cain is meant to be unto the seventh generation. I've read somewhere.
Certain denominations espoused that that is where different skin colors came from, and utilized that as a discriminatory method.
That's always fun. Yeah, there's that one later in the Bible too, when Ham gets in trouble for making fun of his father Noah. Ham is cursed, and that's also one where it's, well, Ham must be black, and black people are cursed, and therefore we can enslave them. And you can tell that it must have been Ham because we're enslaving them, and therefore they must be the cursed ones, or we wouldn't be doing that.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a nice little bit of tail chasing.
Now, why Ham would be black, but the rest of his family isn't, not especially well explained.
I think his dad cursed him really hard.
And it stuck.
Right. And so I think that's the same thing here. The mark of Cain is, well, here.
Right.
Super hard curse.
Yes. And now you must wander the earth.
Yeah, it's a hard life. And I think that's really, I think you're absolutely right. I think that is the point of this chapter, is just life isn't fair and life isn't fun. Get on with it.
And yet, you're still alive. There was no capital punishment.
And that's a really interesting thing, because capital punishment is obviously a great point of contention, especially in religion. The Bible really goes back and forth on that. There's a lot of, don't kill anyone unless I, God, tell you to, or you feel like it, or they turn out not to be a virgin when you thought they were.
Yeah. Old Testament God is pretty killy a lot of the time.
Yep, and it's not just God kills a lot of people, which he does. God spends a lot of time commanding people to kill other people. In, should you find this instance, kill them. And also in specific, like when there's the golden calf, which shows up later, God tells the Israelites to take up arms and kill their brothers. It's not just a, should someone violate this law, kill them. It's you right now, take your sword and go kill that guy right there.
Sure, and then later God supports killing in war situations, helps the walls come down at Jericho, helps David kill Goliath, etc., etc.
Oh yeah, more than that. There's a concept called harem too, and harem means devoted to God. And things can be declared harem, and what happens then if you go to war, if you're making war against something that's harem, you take no spoils, because it's all devoted to God. Whatever it is, you go in there, you kill it. You kill every person, you destroy every building, you burn all their stuff, you kill all their livestock, you leave nothing standing but the trees. And if you're found to have taken any spoils, you in turn become harem. It's infectious. And you are then, you have to be killed and burned.
Huh.
Yeah. So God really, God's like, this stuff's mine. And he gets very, you kill to send things to God.
Ooh, I wonder, A, if that has any relation to hijab, and B, if it was a method of preventing disease spread.
Interesting. I never thought about that. I like the idea. It's certainly much kinder than I'm really sick of these people and I never want to see them again.
Right. Or I don't want you bringing syphilis back to our camp.
Right. No, solid. I think that certainly they didn't have a CDC in those days, and it's an interesting take on it.
Yeah, a lot of the Old Testament commands, when you read them with a cleanliness spin, start to make a little more sense. You go, oh, well, maybe that would have prevented communicable disease or food poisoning or lots of other things. As literal, yeah, you have to burn all the trees, that doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, but maybe you're actually doing that to prevent contagion.
Yeah, not the trees. The trees are specifically, you can leave the trees standing. Everything else gets killed.
Okay, see, and you're probably not getting a lot of diseases from the trees.
Hopefully not. If you're catching tree diseases, things have gone very weird in the nature chain.
Yeah, tell that to the pine trees next spring.
Fair enough. All right, I think we're coming up on time here. So, any closing thoughts?
Original story of sibling rivalry and it not working out. I have brothers, and I've seen the way they both love each other and hate each other simultaneously all the time. And can kind of imagine Cain and Abel being even more so, being each other's only real company. So that's kind of amazing that he would be so angry as to kill his brother.
Yeah, and it's an interesting message for current siblings. I mean, it's, again, obviously the message is don't kill your brother, but the punishment is less deadly than a lot of other things in this book.
Yeah, and for what seems to us a much greater sin.
Yeah, fair enough. All right, well, that's going to wrap it up then. I appreciate you chatting about sibling rivalry and veganism in the Bible.
Awesome. Good to talk to you.